will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Welcome, everyone. I'm Chuck Matrano, Commissioner of the Empire 8 and current chair of the Championships Committee. We're really happy to take this time with you today to talk about the selection criteria database, also known as Pairwise, and we'll talk a little bit about the distinctions there. And first and foremost, I want to thank you all for your service to the championships, on the racks, on the national committees. You are, what make us go, and your responsibilities are important, and your representation of your institutions and your conferences are critical. And so we really do appreciate all the time and energy that you put into making for a great experience for our student athletes. So first and foremost, wanted to make sure that we thank you for that. We can hit the next slide here, Laura. So these are the areas that we'll be covering today regarding Pairwise. And we have selection criteria database, and that's because we're still working through some discussion and some agreements in order to be able to coin the phrase pairwise, but we're not concerned that that will be an issue. But in the event that it does become one, obviously we want to make sure that we have our bases covered. So these are the areas we'll go through. If you have questions, you can raise your hands or put it in a chat. As Laura said, her and JP will be monitoring that. And we want to make sure it's interactive and as informative and educational as it can be for you, so that when you're done with this presentation, you have a comfort level of at least knowing what it is and how it functions. And then we can kind of go from there. So let's hit the next one. So the selection criteria database is a tool that will basically create rankings in a given sport. And the term pairwise is made from the concept that what this computer program or algorithm does is it takes one institution, it applies the criteria, and it compares head to head with each other institution in that sport. So if you're in a sport where there's 150 that sponsor that sport, it will take each institution and compare it to the other 149. And for every pair that that institution wins, they'll get a point. And so the maximum number in this particular scenario would be 149. And so that's where it gets the term pairwise. And so we can hit the next slide here. So this has been quite an evolution over the past 2 years, really. We initially started out by looking at the current criteria that we use and trying to determine how we could improve that. The criteria we have in place has been in place for, I would think close to 20 years. And so, we realized it was time to try to make it more effective. And so we looked at different types of criteria and ways that we could improve that. And during that review and investigation, we came across Pairwise, which for those of you who are involved with ice hockey, you're probably familiar with Pairwise. They've been using it in ice hockey in Division I and Division III for, a number of years now. And it's a system that's been extremely effective for them. And as we looked at it, the thing that was really great about it was, number one, it enhances the criteria that we have. So it uses the same or similar criteria, but it improves on how effective or how helpful that criteria is. We'll talk a little bit about that. The other thing that became clear and evident in that process was the two major concerns that we typically hear from folks, and this probably won't be a surprise to you, is that in our current system, there's a difficulty in having consistent application of criteria. And so what I mean by that is, depending on what rack you serve on, your rack may value one criteria over another. And in the same sport in a different region, they may have a particular criteria that they value over another. So within a sport and within a region, how we're weighing the criteria could be done differently. And more importantly, or equally as important, is that from sport to sport, that criteria may be applied differently. And so, that becomes challenging because, as you all know, coaches want to know how they should schedule, what way is going to be most beneficial for their evaluation. And as committees change, the criteria and the emphasis on particular criteria could change as well. So that's just human nature. Those things are all understandable, but that's one of the big challenges that we have with the current system. And then the other one is transparency. And, getting an understanding of why committees make decisions that they make. You all know you get those questions after rankings come out, or after, national rankings come out, or selections. And so when we looked at Pairwise, this really addressed both of those issues in addition to enhancing our criteria. So Pairwise, the way that it works right now with ice hockey is that data, those statistics are updated in real time. As results come in and are input, you can see precisely what impact that particular outcome had on the rankings themselves. So it's extremely transparent. And the fact that it is, a computer algorithm or program, it's perfectly consistent. It's consistent among each region. It's consistent among each sport. And so the application addresses, all of the concerns that we had going into sort of the evaluation process of what can we do to enhance our criteria to make sure that the most deserving teams are being considered and advanced on. And as you see there, the criteria remains subjective, but the application becomes objective. And so where there is subjectivity is there is a metric that combines the win percentage and strength of schedule. And each committee can determine sort of how to set those dials. So let's say if it's 75-25 balance on that, a committee may say, well, we want to do 70-30. And so that's where you do have that subjectivity as a sport, as a committee, to recommend what the dials should be set at. The other thing with Pairwise is it takes strength of schedule, but it redefines it. It eliminates the OOWP, because with Pairwise, you're already being compared one-on-one with every other institution. So the number that is important is the number that you get when you go through that evaluation. So the win percentage of your opponents is immaterial. We've already got the important number that we need, and it comes from that evaluation of how many pairs an institution has won. The other really positive thing with the way that Pairwise handles strength of schedule is the team is not penalized for beating a team that they should beat. And so, you may be in a situation where your team is first or second in your conference. You're playing the last place team, and their data is not going to be good. It's going to hurt your strength of schedule. Pairwise does not change your strength of schedule based on that outcome, unless it's a loss, obviously. But if you're beating a team that you should have beaten, it does not hurt you. It doesn't penalize you. And so what it's really doing is it's evaluating the quality of all the wins that you've accumulated and giving you credit for that. And we could talk a little bit about how it does that. But the long and short of it is there's no penalty for beating a team that, you should beat. And that's helpful because it allows conferences to make important strategic decisions by bringing in institutions that maybe, in your particular sport, they don't have a strong team, but they help the conference in a number of different ways, or in other sports. Or an institution adds a sport. They're going to have a hard time the first few years building a winning program. And we don't want to discourage that. And we don't want to discourage conferences from, adding institutions that will provide them stability and viability. So it really allows conferences and institutions to ensure that they're providing and retaining opportunities for their student athletes through strategic decisions and not being penalized for that on the back end in terms of, strength of schedule. Okay, Laura, we can do that. Yep, there we go. So I did reference this briefly, and it's a win bonus. And the reason that we feel that this model is more effective than the RPI is as follows. So the way the pairwise works, if you're ranked 50th and you beat the 30th ranked team, you're going to get a win bonus based on their ranking. So there'll be a percentage point applied to that. And if they're 20 ahead of you, you'll get that additional credit. In the RPI ranking, you could be the 25th ranked team and you could beat the first place team. You would get the same credit for that win as you would as if you beat the 24th place team. And as you know, there's a big difference between the quality of the number one team in the country versus the 24th ranked team in the country. And so Pairwise takes that into account. It's not based on a cliff or a cutoff point. It's based on if they were the number one team and you were the 25th team, you're going to get, the appropriate amount of win bonus based on the fact that you beat a team that was 24 rankings ahead of you. So each spot is a certain number depending on what the sport is, depending on what the win bonus is, to be determined by that sport committee, and it's applicable. It's the same thing in our current system. If you look at your in-division wins or in-division record against ranked teams, regionally ranked teams, again, you could have a sport where a team beats the 8th ranked team and it's registered as 1-0 against ranked opponents, and they beat the first place team and it's ranked as 1-0 against ranked opponents. But we know there's a big difference between the team that just got into the ranking at 8 and the team that is the first place. So it takes into account, really where the quality of that institution that you beat and awards you accordingly to that difference. Strength of schedule is always consistent with the rating of opponents. Again, we talked about that. So as you go through pairwise, the number that matters is the number that you see attached to that institution. So if they're, 40th, that's the number that's important. And that's where you get the bonus, so to speak, for beating a team that is ranked ahead of you. We talked about not penalizing a team for winning a game that it's expected to win. And this really does help with institutions that are located in areas of our country that don't have a lot of other institutions around them. One of the things that we had heard as we were going through our evaluation of how could we improve our criteria, a lot of folks on the West Coast were saying, this is really difficult for us because we're isolated and we don't have the ability to go across the country to play a contest for the sake of improving our strength of schedule. And this would make that a completely even playing field for all institutions, no matter where you're located and no matter, what type of quality institutions are in your area or in your region. Now, it's going to benefit you if you can play teams that are highly rated and you can beat them, but it won't penalize you if you're unable to do that. So it really does level the evaluation of all institutions, regardless of where they're located. And that's been something that has been, again, as we've gone through this process of enhancing criteria, that's one thing that we think is really important as well as it relates to strength of schedule. So this is where we talked about the dials a little bit. How would each criterion be weighed? And so we'll get into that a little bit more in depth there. You can hit the next one, Laura. And so here is a women's volleyball ranking. And we're going to click on this to kind of show you what it would look like and how that is being used in terms of adjustments to the dial. So at the top, you can see it says NPI 2575. And that is, those are the dials. So right now, the ranking you're looking at has the dial set at 25 and 75%. Obviously, whatever the dials are set at, they have to equal 100%. And again, that references win percentage and strength of schedule. Now, if we were to adjust that dial, so there are some options that we have sort of preset here. So if we go to 3070, that's how it would adjust it. So committees will be able to, to look at that, see how the different dials may impact what the rankings would look like, and then get a sense of where they would like to have their set at. And what we've done is with a number of sports, we looked back to past championships and past records, and we plugged those results into the algorithm to see what pairwise came up with. And so what you're looking at here, I believe, is from 21 women's volleyball. Correct. Yep. 21 women's volleyball. And if we were to apply pairwise to that season, this is what it would look like. Again, this would be under 3070. And we can kind of walk through some of the designations that you're seeing there as well. So Laura, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the ones with the asterisks are institutions that are AQs.
That's correct.
And the ones without are at large. I think Pool B is somewhere indicated in there. So if you're a Pool B.
So Chuck, just in this scenario, Tim Danahy just ran this based on the numbers. So this doesn't include Pool B, which is where some of the differences came out of what, I'm air quoting, what pairwise selected versus what the committee selected. But we would have the ability, just like we have the ability to designate who the AQs are, to designate who those Pool Bs would be. And they would show up the same as those AQs with the yellow asterisk. And so I can scroll down some, bear with me, it might make you a little bit sick here. So you can see, obviously, there's AQs that are further down the list. And those are, people who, or I guess not people, institutions that are from conferences that maybe aren't as strong, but you can see that those AQs are pulled out all the way down. And then you'll see the schools that are changing in the red, and then it looks like a blue to me, maybe a little purple. And so those are, all those in green are in the championship. And so then you'll see here that volleyball is a 64 team tournament. So there would be, I believe, 43 or 44 AQs in this tournament. And then, so you'll see here then, Hope is the first team here that's green that doesn't have an asterisk. And so what pairwise does is it will take the 44 AQs, asterisk them, and then simply take the next best teams as you go down the list until the bracket is full. So these would be the next best 20 teams in the field to complete the 64 team bracket.
And if you go 1, 2, 3 columns over at the top, you can see it's NPI and then RK. So that's the NPI, and then that's the ranking. So in this instance, Johns Hopkins, 97.93, they're first. They won every single pairwise point that they could possibly, every single pairwise comparison against every other team in the country. So they are the first ranked team, and then it goes on down, so on and so forth. The other thing that's really great about this model is, we use regional rankings to select a national championship. And so those two things don't really make sense, right? It seems like if we're going to select a national championship, we should have a national ranking. That's apples to apples. And as you all know, when we get into the regional rankings and then we're looking at large opportunities, you're comparing two teams from two very different regions, and there's not any real comparable data you can use. So this would give us a true national ranking, and make sure that it's all completely apples to apples. So that's one of the, sort of secondary benefits I feel of this particular model. And I also want to say that you're looking at what pairwise would have ranked and or selected. But remember, this changes the criteria that we are currently using. So this isn't to say that this committee screwed up or made a mistake. They made the absolute right decisions based on our current criteria and how they are applied. So, it's not to say, again, this isn't, to say these committees haven't done a good job. This is a different system altogether. It changes the criteria. There are different things that are included in the criteria. So the two models are not apples to apples. You can't just look at this and say one got it right and one got it wrong. But if we were to apply the pairwise model to this, that's how the selections would look.
Yeah, Chuck, I'll just add a few other comments here. So pairwise also, or I guess pairwise selection criteria database also has the opportunity for committees to consider, so did you already talk about like the home and away multiplier or the road win? So it also has the opportunity for committees to consider those types of weights added into the criteria. And so that's one note that I would make. And then the other note, which we are working with the data still to be able to see all of our sports, but we did run a preliminary pilot on 6 of our championships. And we strategically selected 6 of our sports to be able to see how this metric worked against sports. So the sports that we selected were women's volleyball. It's a sport that has a very large membership, sport sponsorship. And they also play quite a few contests. So that was one way, or one sport we looked at. We also did field hockey because they don't have a very big membership, but they have a medium number of games that they play. We also selected, I forget if it's men's or women's soccer, but we chose one of the soccers because soccer has the added component recently of ties. And so how would that play into this data, and how would those ties impact the ranking? We also chose football. It seems like we only chose fall sports, but I swear we chose others. We also chose football because that's another, they have 250-ish institutions that sponsor, but they only play 10 contests typically. So how does that impact the data? And then we also chose men's basketball, again, a big sponsorship with 25 plus contests. And then we also chose softball. Softball, again, big sponsorship, and they play more into the 40 number of contests. So we strategically picked those sports to run the pilot on initially to see, again, like Chuck said, how did the pairwise stack up to what the committee chose? Not that one is right or wrong, but they were pretty close to the same in all of those championships. And so we are working to see the rest of them, but just so that you all know that we have done some preliminary research on this, and it's really not that much different than what committee selected versus what the pairwise would have selected.
And in each of those instances, we were able to determine why the selection was different based on our criteria. So, it really was great to see because it affirmed that, our committees do a really good job. Like they applied the criteria properly and they were consistent in a given year. So again, they're just two different models. The other thing I want to say is, and we should have said this at the beginning, but this is not a done deal. We have not determined whether or not we're going to do this. This is part of a year-long, or actually a 1.5 year long process of us, trying to inform the membership about this opportunity to get feedback, to see, you know, if there are concerns, questions, is there support for this? So we've done this with our sport chairs. We've done it with our NCAA champs managers. And we've done now, this is the second session with the RACs and with the national committee representatives as well. We'll also be doing a session with the Division III commissioners and with NADIA, which is the National Administrators Organization, and potentially something at convention as well. So, you know, we really want to get the word out. We really want to get feedback from folks so that we can, you know, have an assessment and an evaluation with Champs Committee to determine, okay, this might be something that we should do. It seems like there is support for this, or you know what, we got a lot of feedback that was negative, and you know, this is not something that the membership is willing to move, and that's fine too. So it's just important to know, you know, you'll hear us talking about the benefits of the system, and yeah, we do believe there's a lot of benefit to it, but that does not mean that the decision has already been made. It's ultimately going to be the will of the membership and your feedback that will put us in the direction of whether or not we will use this moving forward. Are there any questions, Laura?
I did get one question in the chat, just would they be able to see the data? And we will be able to get that to support committees once we receive it.
Great. You know, so with this, obviously the consideration of using a computer program to do the rankings and selections, the questions, you know, naturally is what happens to the RAC and the national committees? What are they going to do moving forward? And so we can jump to the next slide and we'll talk about that. Again, this is one of those areas where this is going to be up to the will of the membership. You know, this would be a collaborative effort. So if we get to the point where the feedback indicates in this particular scenario that yes, the membership likes pairwise, let's do it. Okay, next step is what will we do with the RACs? And we believe there could still be a role for the RAC, but ultimately, again, that will be based on your feedback. So some of those responsibilities include just making sure the information that was input into the system is correct. You know, so if you're a conference rep, you would make sure that your institution's data was correct. You work as site reps and are able to recruit more site reps. And this has been really important because you all know that is really, really challenging. Getting site reps to work, particularly in the early rounds, has been really, really difficult. And having so much advanced time where we're not spending and focused so much on what the actual rankings are, frees up a lot of time for you to be able to, you know, be an ambassador, to identify additional site reps, to provide us time so that we can train site reps accordingly. Sometimes, you know, depending on the situation, we might not know who a site rep is, you know, until a couple of days after announcements have been made. And so the ability to get them educated on what their responsibility and role is on site and with that particular tournament is real difficult. And that speaks to ultimately the student athlete and experience for the team. And so, you know, having these, you know, personnel resources opened up to such a great degree allows for so much more advanced planning, education, improved oversight on site, which ultimately really enhances the student athlete experience. You know, we've been talking about this extensively. You know, the gender equity review, it's really important that we make sure that there is, you know, comparable high quality experiences across sports. And this will allow us time to, you know, educate and prepare hosts, educate and prepare site reps, and make sure that there are checks and balances on site. So the best experience possible is unfolding for your student athletes and your teams as well.
Chuck, we do have one question about, would this be available for tennis singles and doubles? not at this point. I think that we still have quite a few things to work through with tennis specifically. We got quite a few questions in our last session about tennis, and we know that tennis is just different in how it works with the singles and doubles process specifically, but then we also have some challenges generally with tennis and score submission. So we would be able to use this for the tennis team portion. I think singles and doubles, we're still figuring out how that would work with this system and just some other general challenges with tennis. So we're still working through tennis and working with Lindsay and Victoria on that.
Thanks, Laura. And then the other question is, would we still have regional rankings? And again, that will be, again, in this scenario, if this is something that is moved forward and adopted, will be based on your feedback. I think there certainly would be great benefit to still having regional rankings. I know that in terms of public relations and exposure, it's important for institutions. And so you certainly could, identify the teams in each region, still have them situated as such, and you just pull it from pairwise and say, okay, first ranked team in region 4, this is this institution, and that institution can say, hey, we were the 7th ranked team in the region this week. There's still that opportunity for publicity and exposure for your institutions and the student athletes. So that is a possibility, but at the same time, if there's a decision where the will of folks is that we'll do away with them altogether, that's fine too. But if they are to exist, they'll simply just be pulled from pairwise from the national numbers and then rounded up into their particular regions. And then so the duties for the national committee, obviously, again, they'll have a substantial amount of time relieved as well. And this will allow them for a lot more time to consider bracketing. As you get closer to the end of the year, you're going to be able to see precisely where things are. You're going to have a really good sense of what types of changes are potentially in store based on the last couple of weeks of the season. And you can start running models of what the best bracket might look like. And so you'd still be working within the same parameters that we have for bracketing, but you have a lot more time to consider models, to consider options, and make sure that you're building the best bracket that you can within those parameters. And so again, this is kind of where I go back to this model is consistent with how we select our championships in terms of it being as much as possible a national selection versus the model we're using now where it's regional up until the last ranking, and then it's national. I know that in a lot of cases, you're still trying to project that, but it's a lot more difficult in our current system as opposed to how it would be with pairwise. The national committees would be, checking data as well. And they would really be digging into how can we improve the student athlete experience? How can we improve the experience for coaches and the institutions? What ways can we, improve officiating for our championship? Basically looking at every layer, every component of the championship and seeing how we can enhance that. And so ultimately, again, that results in the best possible student athlete experience. And that's really what it's about. The national committee would ultimately make that decision in terms of where the dials would be set at. They could get feedback from the regional committees, but ultimately that decision would land on the national committee's shoulders. And they would continue to have the responsibilities that they have in the various other areas of the championship in that particular sport as well. And then so also national office staff, again, these are just some potential concepts that are out there, but more time for education and preparation for committees, for site reps, for hosts. Those are really important because we do get a lot of feedback on people's experiences at championships, and Right now, we're very limited in our ability to be able to, really enhance that substantially because we're spending so much time on rankings and then we're spending so much time on the selection. But if that was relieved, if that stress was relieved, there would be a tremendous amount of time for us to be proactive, to educate and enhance policy and work with hosts well in advance to make sure that the event that unfolds is the best event that it could be. So the quality control component of this is really, really a tremendous upside in my opinion. So again, you have improved site rep education and engagement, and ultimately just more oversight and proactive measures taking place to make it the best championship that we can. Here are some of the questions that we typically receive, giving this, and, we're happy to take any others that you all have. How does it impact student athletes? Again, I think we've talked about the potential, strong upside of it, improving the student athlete experience, just making sure that, when they show up to a site, it feels like an NCAA game. It feels special. For a lot of our competitors, this is going to be, the ultimate experience in their collegiate career. And, they may only play in one round, but they're going to remember that round, and it should be special. I think so many of us have done so many great things to enhance the quality of our conference championships. You want to make sure that it's at least meeting that standard, and it should be exceeding that. And that bar keeps being raised higher and higher because conferences are really, honing in on making sure the conference championship is special. And so there really should be that feeling of this is unique and this is absolutely going to be a great memory for the student athlete. We talked about the regional rankings. Be interested in your feedback on that moving forward. Should we get to that point? Would the criteria be the same for all sports? We've talked a little bit about tennis, so that might be a sport where there might be something that's scalable for that sport. We would have to see how that unfolds. But essentially the criteria would be the same, but the only difference would be dependent upon where committees were setting those dials. So that's where you can take into account something that may be unique in your particular sport. And that's what those dials would serve that purpose at that time. Laura, you want to talk about the process for adopting this potentially as a model?
Yes, so I'll kind of combine the process and the timeline in one. So the process for adopting this is our current, well, I should say currently, selection criteria is legislated in bylaw 31. So bylaw 31 is under the jurisdiction of the championships committee. So this would not have to go to a membership vote at convention necessarily. So the championships committee does have that authority. We're going through the process to get robust feedback from our sport committees so that it can make a good decision. We don't know that if it'll go to convention floor, but the championships committee has that authority to put it into practice. So that kind of falls into the timeline that we have. And so this started, gosh, Chuck, 18 months ago that we started exploring all of this. And the more recent parts of the timeline have been that starting in May, we had this same presentation with our championship managers internally and then sport committee chairs. We had those options at the end of May, beginning of June. We had this session on Wednesday last week, option 1. And so this is targeting our full sport committees plus all of our regional advisory committees. We will also have, again, this presentation to go over the education of it with our commissioners group and also the NADIA administration. And that will be, I believe, the first week of September is when those meetings are set. So again, we've gone through this education process. And what we'll be doing now is seeking feedback from our sport committees with some pointed questions to ask, how do you think this would work for your sport? You'll be able to see that data, give us pros and cons. And we'll also be able to get that feedback from our commissioners group and the NADIA administration. We are currently working through what the contract would look like. So that was part of this also, is that there will be some sort of financial impact based on needing to buy the rights of it from Tim Danahy and then to be able to implement it. And so should the feedback be positive for this and the Champs Committee would choose to implement it, that would be voted on during the Championships Committee's February meeting when we finalize our budget for FY25. So then the earliest that this could go into practice would be for the fall of 2024. That's not a guarantee. Again, we're still going through the process of getting feedback and seeing what our sport committees think about it. And then we would obviously move from there. So the earliest this would go into effect would be the fall of 2024. But obviously there is some elements there that could potentially delay it, or if we get feedback overwhelmingly, which we haven't, that this really isn't ideal for Division III, we can obviously pull back and keep doing what we're doing. So that'll be the process for it. Let me see, there's a few questions. What is the appropriate timing and process for sport committees to provide feedback now that this has been presented? So we will be developing some standard questions that we will give to all of our championship managers to get feedback from their sport committees. So that would come, I would assume, in the next few weeks. I think that the timing of that feedback would line up with either our October or November championships committee's call, so we can get feedback from all of those groups. This video presentation, where will it be posted? We can send a link out. I can actually, it's probably easier if I send it to our champ managers and have them distribute it, but we'll get that link to our champ managers to get out. Would all coaches have access to the national rankings throughout the season? Yes, they would. So currently we are experiencing this with ice hockey. And so how Pairwise works for ice hockey is that it's a link that lives currently at collegehockeystats.net. And it's an instantaneous update. As the system gets new information, it generates the new rankings. And so every single contest is included in it, which could change how a team is ranked. So yeah, so it would live on a public domain that people could go and look at the rankings instantaneously. Is this an all or nothing decision? We use this for all sports or not at all? Is the criteria only winning percent and SOS? Or is it just the two used for this demonstration? So the winning percentage and the strength of schedule are the two main components of this, yes. And that really comprises, I mean, I don't want to say everything we need to know, but it comprises the big parts of our selection criteria. And some of the selection criteria that Chuck mentioned that will go away would be results versus ranked teams or your regionally ranked teams. And that's simply because, again, you're being compared to every institution in every category. So you don't really need to be compared to, air quoting here, ranked teams, because you're getting compared to every single person. I do think that it would be a divisional decision that we would go with this or not go with this. We obviously have ice hockey that is using it and our other sports aren't. But I don't think that the championships committee has gotten down the road that far, just because we haven't gotten specific feedback from our sport committees yet. And is it going to be used across all of the other divisions? Not currently. Division III is the only division looking at it. I don't think that Division II has fully ruled it out. I think they're kind of letting us be the guinea pigs right now. But currently Division III is the only division looking at going to Pairwise for all of its sports. Is along those same lines as Pairwise all or nothing? Could this be used as a tool and not completely replace the existing process? I mean, in theory, it could be. You could use it as another component like the RPI. You could have this pairwise ranking as a part of selection. But generally, and Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, the feeling is that Pairwise does a really good job of using our current criteria and creating this ranking. And so to use this as our metric seems like it would be a good option.
Yeah, I think that because it does essentially take all of our criteria and provide you with a ranking through that, I can't imagine this being used alongside how we traditionally rank and select, because you would really be opening yourselves up for a lot of criticism, for one. You know, and you know, it does the work for you. So, you know, again, I suppose it could be considered one of the criteria, but it's really, you know, it's a calculation of all the criteria, and an enhancement of the criteria as well. So we feel like this would be certainly something that we would, you know, and the true benefit is the fact that, again, it frees up so many other opportunities for us to improve our championships. You know, that's what's really got me excited about this, is just the fact that this speaks directly to student athlete experience and making it the best that it can be. So it addresses a lot of different areas, but that's one area where there's just so much promise. You know, we have so many championships and so many contests, and, you know, we really do have to make sure that, you know, we have some quality control in those areas, and that they're, you know, we're providing the best experiences that we can.
We have a hand raised from Frank Barnes. Go ahead, Frank, and ask your question. You need to unmute yourself. No, or you can put it in the chat if you have a. We have another. Crystal, I see your hand is up. Frank.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to get some clarification on the strength of schedule piece. Right now, hockey is using the RPI formula, in which you can tweak the individual components. So winning percentage, opponents winning percentage, and opponents winning percentage. And right now, hockey is using the RPI formula, in which the opponents winning percentage is the highest percentage of that. And I just wanted clarification on going to win percentage and strength of schedule. And we know strength of schedule incorporates the opponent's winning percentage and opponent's winning percentage. And I'm throwing a lot of percentages out there, and I just wanted clarification on if we go to the win percentage and strength of schedule as the two components which we can tweak. Will the strength of schedule component be the traditional 2/3, 1/3, in which you don't tweak those individual components? I hope that question makes sense.
It does, and I hope that my answer also makes sense, Crystal. So I did ask Tim this question after our call last week, just asking how ice hockey applied this, and Tim's answer to me was that we would be shifting away from using RPI in that metric, and it would be going to the NPI, which is the NCAA Power Index. And I believe that takes out the opponents, the OOWP, because again, that can be kind of already baked into that NPI. So you would take away that 2/3, 1/3 with the OWP, OOWP. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yes. Thanks for that.
All right, this is Frank. You're finally figured out how to unmute.
Yes, perfect. Hey, Frank.
Here. My question was, we always have in tennis the ITA rankings that are going on at the same time. Are you going to encourage them to not do the ITA rankings with the human bias, so that people don't say, well, why didn't my person get selected? They're ranked ahead of this person in the ITA.
I haven't discussed this with.
That might be.
Yeah, I haven't discussed this with Chuck yet, so maybe a facial expression might tell me if I'm going along the right path, Chuck. I don't think that we would discourage our sports coaches associations from publishing rankings. They already do that, and people already confuse our rankings, regionally rankings, with the sport association rankings. So I don't think that we would say you can't do them. We can't say that you can't do them. So I don't think that we would discourage them from doing it. It just would need to be, I mean, education, even that we would need to do now to say, we understand that you might be number 1 or 2 in the ITA rankings or whatever ranking, but that doesn't have a bearing on the NCAA's championship selection.
Great.
And we did get one other question here, sorry. Would games outside the division not hurt or help you? Chuck, I don't know how that's handled in ice hockey.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's, under our current system, that will come into secondary criteria. So, I don't think it would have any bearing on your rankings. That's not part of Pairwise as I understand it. So that's an unofficial answer. Yeah, that would be a secondary. So looks like we have another hand up too.
I think that was just still Frank's hand up.
Okay. There is a high profile Division I sport that was looking at this with some interest as well. I do think that in time, depending on where we end up with this, I think if we adopt this, I think you're going to see it spread to the other divisions. It's, looking at what Division I uses and looking at this model, this is a superior model in my opinion. And I know that that's picking up traction amongst a couple of the sports as well as it, as word sort of starts to get out there a little bit.
Great, thanks, Chuck. Do we have any other questions? If something comes up between now and when we ask for feedback from our sport committees, please feel free to reach out to myself, to Chuck, or to the championship manager. We will be happy to answer whatever we can or find answers for you. But we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And we look forward to getting feedback from you all on this, this possibility.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.